open science framework is kind of what I wanted to talk about. So yeah, in terms of contextualizing open science, I mean, one way of doing it is to think about what some people are calling the replication crisis in psychology. There's definitely been a few high-profile cases of data fabrication where people have just made up data, and various people have gone back and done the detective work to identify these cases and so on. But I think that's not really probably the biggest issue. Much more widespread are these sort of more subtle and problematic behaviours. A classic issue is underpowered studies. So where experiments with small samples are being conducted, or observational studies with a whole pile of either predictors or dependent variables are being done with small samples, and where there's obviously a desire for novelty or interesting findings, and where there's a lot of flexibility in how the data can be analysed. That's kind of a context that's ripe for what some people call p-hacking, basically trying a whole bunch of different things, throwing out cases, transforming, not transforming, having 10 dependent variables and just reporting the 2 that are significant. And I mean, I guess there's a growing awareness that these practices, that you can get p equals less than 0.05 pretty easily if you have enough flexibility in your data in terms of dropping cases, selectively reporting outcome variables. And furthermore, publication bias itself, even if researchers were perfectly honest, it may be that the studies that just happen to get the good results, or a combination of a bit of flexibility in data analysis with top journals preferring to publish what appear like sexy and interesting results, can further compound these issues. Throw on top of that, there's what's known as harking, which basically presenting formal hypotheses for findings that you've already found in your data, and writing the paper up as if there's a bunch of formal hypotheses, and then so it's hypothesizing up the results and known harking. So that's almost just how a lot of journals expect papers to be written. That you have these formal hypotheses and you test them. Meanwhile, a large proportion of people may be analysing the data, finding out what they think is kind of going on, and then writing those up as hypotheses. So there's clearly not a distinction here entirely between what is a confirmatory result and an exploratory result. So just thinking about this is just some responses. And I think, there is this skepticism of the underpowered studies making counterintuitive claims. The old sort of n equals 20 between subject experiment looking at subtle effect. With n equals 20, you can probably tell the differences that, say, men and women differ in height, but testing very subtle effects with those kind of sample sizes is obviously going to be problematic. I think it's kind of openness is coming from multiple levels. You've got certain journals that are encouraging open practices. You've got some reviewers saying, demanding or asking to see data or materials or whatever. Some funding bodies are kind of requiring various forms of openness. And and openness is such a broad concept. You've got the registration arm, common in clinical trials and in other domains. You've got the idea of sharing materials and data and scripts, and then there's sort of a whole separate arm around open access publication, which is in some ways very important, but equally quite a kind of distinct set of aims around making the final product more accessible to readers, and even for reanalysis and things like that. I really like the top guidelines. I think basically a set of journal kind of rules around openness that have been put together by the OSF, and the idea is that journals can adopt a set of guidelines. They don't have to kind of develop them all from scratch, but rather there's various levels of openness that they can adopt in terms of, from one level of like requiring data sharing to requiring data sharing unless you have a good reason not to at least just putting in a reason why you can't share, or sharing, and various, and that covers a whole range of specifications. So I think getting the journals on board is a big part of the incentive system of science. And then there's various bodies talking about, say, data sharing, material sharing, and what it involves, and the practical issues around all that. I think also there's kind of this kind of community of open science people, and no doubt that's occurring in all sorts of fields, but in psychology, there's definitely a sort of a kind of cluster of social media kind of people that if you start floating around Twitter and a couple of these major sort of methods, forums on Facebook or blogs like Andrew Gelman's, you get to see some common faces popping up, but with probably many people who are sort of slightly involved, and then a whole thousands and thousands that are kind of lurking below and reading all this discussion of what's going on. And I think also there's a kind of a changing norm of discussion where previously an academic could become very famous by kind of doing rubbishy studies that have been p-hacked, but they get the sexy results, and they get lots of papers, and they get their Nature paper or their Psych Science paper or their JPSP papers. But now they're going to get some flack if it's clearly that, their studies look fishy, they're not replicating, or there'll even be people who will kind of ask to see the data and reanalyze it and identify mistakes. And there's much more tolerance now of basically calling that out in public. And so, it's a different landscape. So in terms of kind of categorizing all these things that are going on in open science, the concept of the badge is kind of evolved and kind of captures three broad categories I was hoping to talk about. One is open data, another is open materials, and another is pre-registration. And so some journals are implementing these badge systems. So if you pre-register your study, i.e. you set out your design, hypotheses, sampling scheme, analysis plan beforehand, register that, you can get a pre-registration badge. Open materials, you can get that by sharing items to a survey or specifications of your... I don't know too much about the brain stuff, but I imagine there'd be settings and stuff for scanning and procedures, and open data badges. So that's kind of capturing three major categories, and a lot of journals, a growing number of journals are implementing these badges as a kind of incentive to, it's kind of signpost, we value this stuff. I was trying to think about what were the benefits of open science and why people would want to do it, given that it is a little bit of work. A lot of it's clearly good for science, and i.e. the efficient production of knowledge, in that it potentially either reduces errors or fraud, or makes it easier to identify these things. And it also enables others to build on other people's work more by reusing materials and data and so on. But that doesn't sound very... when I read that, I thought, hang on, why would an actual researcher want to do it? Because, sure, they may care about science, but what if they're like, but I don't want to be caught out for errors and problems and mistakes? So I think the general response to that might be that slowly the incentive structures are beginning to reward open science practices. Journals, reviewers, editors are starting to appreciate it and request it. I think more and more researchers that are kind of embrace the open science philosophy kind of are evaluating other researchers in terms of how much they perceive them to be honest and aspiring for the goals of science versus, I think, some scientists that might be famous. There would be a sizable portion of people who would say, yes, they're famous academic, but I don't trust their results. I think they p-hack. I think they hark. I feel like they've got more of it. They're a little bit more on the. They've got an agenda and a theory they're trying to validate rather than they're seeking truth. And this was my kind of snapshot of, obviously things that are going on for openness and reproducibility. Obviously, pre-registration is one aspect. Then there's sort of a set of things that are not really openness, but they seem to be going along with it. Basically calls for more statistical power. There's all sorts of debates about, statistical inference and the right alpha levels we should be using, and calls for better statistical practice. There's all that sort of stuff that's kind of just broader, but seems to kind of co-occur with basically this goal of more reproducible, robust science. In terms of data analysis, obviously you can share scripts, and there's lots of practices that are evolving around that. There's data sharing, sharing materials, and then we've got the open publishing or a preprint and postprints. So I was going to talk a little bit about the open science framework. If people actually kind of use this platform at all right, so I mean, I'm talking about what I know, so that's part of it. But also, I think this is a great platform for doing open science, and I can talk a little bit about the ways that I've been using it and what it's enabling. And more and more people in psychology are using it to do all the things you'd want to do in open science. So I'll talk about a little bit about what I know least about, which is pre-registration. It's certainly it's something on my to-do list. And obviously, if you do any clinical trials, you'll know about pre-registration because that's pretty much essential these days. But for people doing exploratory or observational studies or non-clinical experiments, the general idea is that you would you would specify your study design, your aims, your hypotheses, your analysis plan, typically, and before you collect your data. And this could be just an internal process you go through to satisfy in your own mind that the analyses you're running truly are confirmatory and not just, you're not kind of muddying the waters about what's exploratory and confirmatory analysis. But more often it's used to signal to readers that you're an honest kind of researcher, and when you say that something is confirmatory, it truly is. And so in that case, the idea is that you can register and get a time-stamped, archived version of this document that sets out your plan. And there are various ways of doing this, and there are various ways of setting out such a document. There's askpredicted.org, which I haven't used, but I believe they have 8 sort of standard questions, all kind of optioned to make it as easy as possible. Equally, there's also OSF registrations, which also let you kind of specify these things and get a time-stamped copy. So in terms of what the OSF looks like, I'll just show you quickly. OSF.io. If you haven't got an account, it's super easy to create one. And, it lists all your projects. So, here was, what's an example? I think this is just a preprint, but there's no data in this paper. But basically, you've got projects, and you might have some data files down here, your analysis or whatever, but this could also be where you have your analysis plan and registration. And if you want to get a time-stamped copy, you can just click on registrations and say, oh, I'm going to register and archive this. And then you'll find there's a bunch of different ways that you can pre-register things. There's some quite structured sort of ways of recording pre-registrations. But I believe as long as your pre-registration documents are in that repository, you can just do an open-ended registration. And this can just be a summary of my registration. As long as the materials are in that repository, then is it safe to click this? Maybe I won't click that, but once you do, this will set in process the registration, and there's a few ways that you can cancel it before it starts. I think you need to confirm by email within 48 hours, and after that it's kind of locked. And I think you can take it down, but it will leave the metadata, at least that there was a registration there once upon a time. But the idea is that it will have an archive copy. So I think it's two different things, isn't it? It's like I guess clinical trials. I don't have much experience with clinical trials, but I assume normally you just register your clinical trial and then you publish as normal. But when you go to publish, you mention this.
So that would be.
It's just a component of it. And occasionally you're also seeing it these days when people get revised and resubmits, like in sort of multi-experimental journals, you see that, study 1 wasn't pre-registered, but then they got told to go away and do study 2 or 3 and they were pre-registered. So I guess registered reports is just peer-reviewed pre-registration where a journal agrees to publish a paper conditionally on you doing what they've reviewed to say is good. And the idea that they won't reject the results based on non-significant results, they won't reject the study. Basically for what they might consider uninteresting findings. I guess in general that these kind of studies would presume that you get good statistical power, because I guess to say that the study is going to be interesting before even seeing the data, you probably want to have reasonable power. But there's lots of resources here. They talk about how to do it. 108 journals, so you can see whether anything in your field is covered. All right, so I'll switch gear to open data. This is something that I have been doing with most of my first authored papers and a lot of my student-led work, at least, And it's got its challenges, but it certainly can create resources for other researchers, a lot of journals are either encouraging or appreciating this kind of thing. So I think it can just create a favourable impression, especially if you sort of know the journals where they appreciate open practice. But it does introduce a whole range of kind of challenges. You've got the issue of will ethics permit you to share the data, which is closely related to the question of whether participants consented to the data being shared. And there are all sorts of debates about what happens when the PLS does not include anything about consent or not, like it just leaves the question blank. I think there's been a tradition of, I remember when I first go, through my honours, like there was just a standard sentence like that the data would be absolutely private and wouldn't be shared, and all that sort of stuff. And and a lot of funding bodies, a lot of people saying, well, you don't need to put that there, and actually, a lot of time it's appropriate to share anonymous data. And so then that raises the question about what is anonymous data, even if you can share it, because either you can make a case that it's ethically acceptable, or you're doing your study afterwards and you've written the PLS in a way that ideally allows for explicit consent. It does force you to think a little bit how you structure your data and how you kind of prepare it. And I know with me, one of the first steps that I'll do before I even start analysing a data set is I'll kind of do a pre-analysis, or not pre-analysis, but a kind of a data manipulation where I'll remove certain things. And then sometimes if I can, I won't even collect the data at all. So trying to avoid collecting names and email addresses if I can. But if it's necessary, that's almost excluded in some preliminary data manipulation prior to it becoming the data set that I'm analysing. So it's almost like I'm not muddying the water between the data set with identifiers and the kind of data set that I have. And so there's obvious identifiers like names and emails and addresses and dates of birth and so on. Then you get the more complicated ones like combinations of age, gender, occupation. I guess people who deal with obscure diseases would be part of this, but equally, the one case that I sometimes ponder is obviously knowing that someone's 35 and male is not going to identify someone, but if it's from a particular organisation or a particular cohort, a particular university student sample, you do wonder, well, okay, well, what if someone knew that was the organisation, and like if someone was really on a witch hunt, could they work it out who certain people were? And I think that often there's been high-profile cases of data sets being made public in an anonymous form, and then someone's come along and been able to re-identify who people were. And once data gets out there, well, then it's, in some sense, there's no taking it back. I mean, maybe less so with our stuff, where you could put it online and no one's actually going to look at it and you can take it down. But anyway, besides that, so there is this sense of, oh, maybe it really is a kind of a cost-benefits analysis of, if you're dealing with very sensitive stuff, well, you've got to be more careful, and if it's really just a really low sensitivity psych experiment, and the kind of case you're trying to protect against is, some weird person who knows that this person was in the study and it's going to go on the OSF and it's going to, it's sort of like maybe that's an acceptable cost-benefit trade-off that, well, yeah. So, but anyway, but it does raise the question, it's not just black and white, what's anonymous.
Yeah.
Copyright's another one. This is perhaps more so with the metadata. So if you use, like a proprietary psych test, it'd be nice if you could just put the item text online, and so that people could see what each question was, and that's what this question was. But copyright can prevent that, or at least put limits on who can see that sort of stuff. If you're dealing with massive, like the Hilda data set or other large panel studies, presumably there's lots of permission processes to share data, or if you're working with co-authors and collaborators, well, there's permission. And then there's the old fear of preventing being scooped. And I mean, I suppose if generally you share the data after, you can have a private repository during the publication process, and then on acceptance you can make the repository public or so on. But so in that sense, that prevents scooping of the specific analyses. But sometimes you're thinking, oh, I may want to go on and do another paper based on this data set, and I don't want someone to scoop me on those. And yeah, I mean, I think in general, like the idea of data sharing is you don't have to share the whole data set of some large study, just the variables that you're analysing. But equally, yeah, I mean, I suppose maybe there are cases where someone could come along and you can have embargo periods on data sharing, and you can have an OSF allows embargo periods. I think using the registration function, you can specify a date in the future. So in theory, you could. I don't think embargo periods would generally satisfy badges. They're not a big fan of that, but if you wanting to kind of give yourself some time to reanalyze it, then you could do that. There's also more and more there's protected access repositories. The thing that nobody in open science likes is the data available on request statement that's put into papers that means basically who knows what. Because people leave academia, people lose data, people die. So at the end of the day, the data disappears. And there's been studies to show that if you ask people that have listed that, you might get 30% of requests satisfied, and it drops more and more over time. But there are protected access repositories where the access granting procedure is independent of the researchers. These list a few of those kind of forums where you can upload data and have some format to control access. So not just anyone can download it. There might be some terms or whatever, but it is independent of the person, and that's often sufficient for showing that you're sharing the data. There's also decisions about which variables to include and how raw, which we were touching on before, how raw to make the data file. Like in general, the more granular the data, the more likely it is to be useful to other people. So if you've got a psychological test, including item level data, not just scale scores, is going to be more useful. And so on. And it can be good to include both a raw and a clean version of the data file, so that people can go back that next step if they want to make different decisions about inclusion, exclusion, and so on. Furthermore, to make it useful, there needs to be metadata or code books that describes what the variables mean. Like the simplest thing is just to have, this is a variable, this is, a description for each variable about what it is. If you've got psych tests, then often there'll be details about how to score each test. If a variable's a derived variable, then you probably want to make that clear. Don't just put 1 and 2 for gender. Put male and female, or at the very least have the code book or file explain what those are. So there's all sorts of kind of common sense stuff there, but a code book is pretty essential. Open materials is also another kind of arm of this stuff, which is, I guess, about going beyond the kind of the vagueness of a method description to include more details about the materials you used, with the aim of making it easier for other people to kind of build on your research and also clarify ambiguities. So you could include copies of surveys, with the full, say export from Qualtrics or whatever, or if you use experimental software, things, the scripts for those. If you've got a custom software, like you're running an experiment in a lab, you could upload that. I don't know. I was trying to think what other materials people have. Coding books for observational studies. Basically anything really that can be digitized. And the main challenge I've found is copyright. A lot of psych tests are copyrighted, so and there are other tests where the copyright is very fuzzy and vague. like it's been published in a journal. So, and the items appear all over the place, but it's fuzzy. And some people go with the, well, if it sort of looks like it's probably permitted, for scientific purposes, I'll just put it up there, and if they're not happy, they'll tell me to take it down, whereas other people are more risk averse and, don't do that. But, that's a challenge. Then you've got open materials, which I'm not sure if the open materials badge includes this or not. There's been a bit of discussion, but certainly the idea of reproducible data analysis is something that's a part of the open science idea. This is basically saying you have some sort of script that produces your outputs. In the best case, it does all your data pre-processing, creates your derived variables, filters the cases, creates the derived clean data set, computes new variables, and then runs whatever analyses you want, and so on. So that's obviously nice, both as a document of exactly what data analysis decisions were made, and exactly what kind of, in certain analyses there are choices, right? Like what exact factor analysis rotation did you use, or what exact bootstrapping method did you use for your confidence intervals, and so on. So that would be specified, and especially in the data cleaning phase, there are lots of options that can be, essentially documented by a script. Pretty much any statistical software will give you there'll be some way of using it that is more reproducible than others. So while a lot of psych people use SPSS, and SPSS isn't great for reproducibility, it certainly can do syntax, and you can record all your analyses in syntax. You can record how you've calculated your variables and all sorts of things. I find SPSS gets a bit messy, especially when you want to start, you might clean some cases and then exclude some variables and create a new variable, and you want to produce some output and then compute some stuff on that output. It can get messy, and I find reproducibility is a little bit tricky. Obviously R is great for reproducibility, because it's just a programming language essentially. I mean, the main thing I think is whatever tool people are using, if they want to do a reproducible analysis, that you use it in that way that enables you to, as much as possible, have one file or one script that you can run, and it produces all the output. And if it can also clean the file and produce the output, then that's like a next level. The ultimate level for the purist is things like R Markdown and SWeave, where you have a document that integrates code chunks, and essentially you run the document and it will produce a compiled report that integrates your graphs and tables and results in one consistent workflow. So there's no errors in copying, pasting tables and results, and everything's all integrated.
On that, I mean, I've seen it being used, but it looks rather time-consuming. Is it worth the effort to get to that level?
I remember once when I told someone I'd stopped doing it. Like it felt like they were saying, like, it used to be all about the music, man. It's like there is. I mean, I think it's. I did my PhD in it, and that's and I tried doing a few papers with it, but now I've just kind of fallen back to Microsoft Word and my and basically having a script that will produce the figures and the tables, but I still have to kind of do a bit of manual formatting and still have to copy and paste the figure in. And I don't know. I mean, I think it depends on what your collaborators use, and think it can. Things like getting tables just right is tricky, like all the APA things, or if you have complex tables. Yeah, I mean, I also think if your analyses aren't that complicated, if you can sort of, the step from going from relatively final output to the document is not the end of the world. So, yeah, I've kind of taken a step back from that, but I think it's a nice ideal. But I also find collaborating in Word or whatever it is that people are using, that if you can just automate, the production of your results and your figures as much as possible, then I find that more workable. But, yeah.
It's like you're going to so dirty.
Yeah. It's a little bit like that. So yeah, anyway, I got lots of stuff on the web about some, script sharing and reproducible workflows in R and various systems. But I think the idea is that if you can upload a data analysis script with your data, that a person can come along, run that script and produce something like what you've got, well, hopefully the exact numbers you've got in your journal article, then that's great. And it's one source of error that does creep into the literature in a big way. So I guess now I wanted to switch gear just to publications. So this is kind of a separate arm of open science in a sense, that the goal isn't so much about making the science better, but rather making it more accessible to the public, or even just to researchers who are kind of sick of kind of clicking through paywalls and, or trying to access something on their phone and realizing that they need to log in through the university proxy and anyway, whatever. So there's definitely a push towards open access publication, and everyone would love to live in a world where, I don't know, it was basically like it is now, but all the journals were free, and anyone could access the content anywhere, anytime. But I guess it's a tricky system of incentives. Often the best journals are not open access, and a lot of people don't have the money to pay the really big open access fees or even the smaller open access fees. No, I personally am not that comfortable with the incentive structure implied by the author paying for publication. It seems like, well, I guess the first thing is the distinction between preprints and postprints, where generally preprints are the manuscript up to submission to a journal, although there's some fuzziness of what do you call a manuscript that's gone through one round of review, but it's going to go through another round of review. But yeah, so I guess you've got the preprints proper, in the sense of a manuscript you put together before peer review, and then postprints being your unformatted version of the manuscript that was accepted for publication, prior to it being formatted in the nice journal format. And I think most journals have rules about preprints and postprints that are often different. Most are pretty tolerant of preprints. Although, yeah, you do hear about some journals not liking preprints because the ideas are already out there in some sense, and so, yeah, I do like the idea of sharing postprints, like on a thing like on a preprint server. I mean, it's just a way for anyone in the world to get access to a version of the article, at least, even if for the people who can't access. And if you go to share your ideas or research on social media, like, it feels a bit silly kind of sharing a link to the publisher's copy when you know that, most people are not going to hit an abstract and that's all they're going to see. Like, what's the point of that? So if I can share on social media the preprint link, then most people will be able to look at it. and it doesn't take time. And there's the question of permissions, and the Sherpa Romeo site will generally give you an idea of what a publisher allows. They're generally, with postprints, a lot of them have embargo periods. Although, yeah, the embargo period can vary, and what's permitted can vary based on the nature of the site. In order of kind of permission, more publishers allow you to just put something on your own website. Many will explicitly forbid commercial preprint servers, so things like ResearchGate, but are more tolerant of not-for-profit preprint servers like the OSF and Archive and SciArchive and university repositories and stuff. So in that sense, yeah, I've started using SciArchive quite a bit. And yeah, nice thing is they generally do connect with Google Scholar. So I imagine a lot of the world finds their papers through Google Scholar, and if there's a direct PDF link, then that's probably going to make some people happy. My kind of personal thing is to try and make the actual preprints a bit prettier. It's a minor thing, but I kind of personally not a big fan of double-spaced kind of manuscript versions. I usually spend 30 minutes just kind of trying to make it a bit prettier. So yeah, SciArchive is pretty nice option for preprint servers in psychology. It's a partnership of the Society for Improvement of Psychological Science and the OSF. Basically, the OSF has set up the technology for doing preprints, and they've partnered with Archive, which is a massive preprint server for, mathematics, statistics, computer science, physics, and a few areas like that. And so there's all these different something archive out there that are all using the OSF as the underlying preprint technology. So, you can go to SciArchive, and it looks a bit like that, and you can go, okay, well, I'll add a preprint, and you can just, upload a PDF, or if you have an existing OSF project, you can connect it to that, and put in the discipline and a few basic bits of information and the authors. So yeah, most of it's pretty straightforward. If it is more a post-print, then you can specify the year of publication and who the copyright holder is, and you can also connect it to the DOI of the publisher. And in theory also that means that a few things get connected up. So I think like Altmetrics might use this DOI so that sort of Twitter and whatever activity to this preprint gets connected to the main article, and a few things like that. So just to give you a feel for what it looks like. So you've got there's a preprint which people can download. You can get your views, which is kind of nice if you're going to keep track of how many people are reading it or I don't know, downloading something, putting it on their computer. You can also, if you connect it to a project, it can be actually connected to the actual repository. So this was a project I shared with. There was a zip file of the analysis script, the data, and you can sort of put the preprint as a file in that project and say, you can create a preprint. So it's all connected to the actual data and scripts that you're sharing. So you can sort of, or you can just make the preprint a standalone thing from the main project. Just thought I'd quickly show a couple of example projects. And with the caveat that I'm still learning too, and I think like there's this goal or aspiration of this perfect open science workflow and perfect reproducible sharing everything and so on. But I kind of feel like, yeah, well, let's just do something. And I feel like over the last 10 years it's been evolving, and I add a few things into the workflow, and probably pre-registration's on the list. When I looked at this, I noticed that my code books weren't really there, or you'd have to hunt a bit to work out what things mean, but hopefully it's explanatory enough. But with that caveat in mind, this was one paper we published recently in European Journal of Personality. They're really into data sharing. They do the badges, and you can tell that they really like sharing scripts, data, all that sort of thing. And so yeah, we had the data. We've got this was the clean cases in CSV and data format, and so people can browse that data file if they want, or download it. I also had scripts, which was a zip file of the project. To look in that, you'd see there was, this is all just files from my kind of workflow with R. So you've got the data in here. If you were to open this in R, you'd see all sorts of files that perform a reproducible analysis. I don't know. Everyone's got their workflow. I probably wasn't going to go into that too much unless people are really keen, but yeah, that's all. Also notice that you can, if you go into contributors, you can create, one, you can add the authors of the paper, and they can either be listed names or linked. If they have OSF accounts, they're kind of linked up. You can also create view-only links, so this is a standard part of my process if you're doing anonymous peer review. But you want to share these resources with the reviewers, but you don't want to say who you are, you can create a view-only link. So anonymize, and peer review or whatever, create, and that link you can put in your paper, and you see, oh yeah, that's what it looks like. Anonymous contributors. Assuming your names aren't on any of the metadata of your Word documents or PDFs or whatever. So you've got the actual link to the repository that at the time is not working because it's private, and then you have a footnote saying, well, this is the version for peer review, and once the thing's accepted, you would click make public. And yeah, the other thing so I'm learning with registration is I probably should go through these when you do publish something, you should probably register it in the sense that that way you have said that this version that accompanies a paper is a final and unchangeable version. I think at the moment, in theory, these things I've uploaded, I could just change, whereas I probably should register them so that they're date stamped and unalterable. So yeah, I guess at the moment, my publication workflow looks a bit like this. Well, one, I'm not pre-registering yet for various reasons, but it's on the list for certain studies. You can prepare a private repository, and you can use the OSF also for just private workflows as well, if you're kind of just trying to put your materials in one place and collaborate and do all those things. And then when you're putting your manuscript, you create links to various aspects of it, and those links are kind of very permanent. You can draw attention to it in your cover letter, and then make it public and register it once it's published. So, yeah, just to give you a really quick feel for what the OSF looks like. Once you've created an account, which is super easy, you can see all your projects. It's very easy to create a new project. You might add some contributors. And you can either add existing people or
I love it if they're just
you don't have. They don't have. If you email them, they'll be invited to join. But if you've got a whole pile of people who no, they don't want to have anything to do with that, you can still list them and just whatever, have access and so on. And then you can you can use the file storage system on here. So you can just create a folder like data and preprint or something like that, and you can just so you could drag and drop that in, and it's uploaded. And there's notifications. So John Smith, if his email was linked to this, would be sent an email that a file has been added or updates have occurred. Turn off if you don't want to receive. You can create a wiki that's fairly user-friendly. So headings. So that's kind of almost a blogging platform as well, or whatever you want to call it. A wiki. It's all free. It's all archived in the sense that they've paid some amount of money to someone, so that if they ran out of money, the content would stay up for 50 years. It's not for profit. No. It's good, but maybe there's lots of other systems out there, no doubt, as well, for data sharing, particular use cases and things. Norms and conventions are changing, infrastructure is changing, incentives are changing. Not quite sure how quickly and what the asymptote will be, what the endpoint will be, but I guess the idea is that this is all part of more rigor in science, more reproducibility. And I guess my thinking is that this is something that you can invest more or less in, and obviously we've all got to actually still keep producing science, still keep publishing and still keep doing good stuff. And so an obsession with workflow can get in the way with that sometimes. So I guess the idea is that doing a bit of this or integrating it in various ways can is all good. So I kind of say, well, next project, what little extra bit will I add into the workflow to make it more open or whatever? Evolve as things evolve. Yeah.